When talking about death metal's originators and what it's all about, you just can't ignore the impact of death. Masterminded by Chuck Schuldiner, death broke ground with different sounds and styles that would influence an entire genre of chaos. Having left this mortal plane, he also left a legacy behind that was strong enough to catch in a documentary. Death by Metal. Death isn't the first name in death metal for nothing. Yeah, I always wondered why it was called death metal. My guess was that the bands were singing about peace, living happy, and wanting to visit Alaska. Death by Metal goes into each era of Death's albums, as well as the Control Denied stuff. Even the Voodoo Cult and Slaughter stuff is mentioned somewhere. For the most part, the format is that each album and tour gets its share of screen time. The story is told through interviews with Rick Ross, Terry Butler, Chris Reifert, Steve DiGiorgio, Richard Christie, Albert Mudrian, Eric Greif, Frank White, Jeff Wagner, and several more. While everyone speaks, live footage and pictures from the past are the visual aid. Once in a while, there's old TV and audio interviews to go along. It seems like every picture has been photoshopped for some cool effects and popping graphics, but they still represent their time effectively. All the transitions and editing is cool too. There's this one spot that's just awesome.
One thing I remember about Chuck was just he would stand kind of stiff, kind of still. And when he'd open his mouth for one of those big screams, his tongue would stick out a little bit and he'd just like emit this like, you know.
For the demo days, the only one that's discussed specifically is Death by Metal. Nothing is said about the other demos before Scream Bloody Gore, but you can hear them playing in the background and you can see the artwork for Mutilation at one point. The Symbolic demo recording story was a good inclusion. It shows how an established band can also need to work out songs before any major recording.
We have an 8-track recorder now, which is still not a lot of tracks, but I remember there was no way we were going to get a decent drum sound to make demos. It just wasn't going to happen. So we would work out the songs, we'd play them, and I had my drum machine with me. So what I did is I just took my drum machine, everything that we play in the afternoon, I'd spend hours at night replicating on the drum machine.
Everyone's take on things that happen, what Chuck was like, and the impact of the music seems genuine and well told. Gene Schuldiner telling the story of how Chuck got into music was touching.
That was after my son Frank had passed away. So to me that was great. You know, they were all about the same age and it was great. They were wonderful, wonderful kids.
Plus, Watchtower was his favorite band, so it's good somebody talked about his influences, including the power metal worship on Symbolic.
Symbolic, Chuck's riffs were starting to really explore his love of 80s power metal.
Discussing Chuck wanting to evolve and not box himself into a genre was also a plus.
So I feel like I won't put a limit on this, and I want to keep continuing to grow as a musician.
It made his musical progression and contempt for the name Death in later years seem plausible.
I don't ever try to control what people play. I just said come in and let loose, let the metal flow.
Right, it's a pretty brutal name, definitely. At the time, I wanted something, extreme, something brutal, shocking to go along with the music, and now I would probably call it something different, but...
Even the explanation for the lyrics on Spiritual Healing made sense. Yes, they were singing about horror, but this time, relatable and realistic horror.
Death is a band that I can put my personal outlook on certain things in life into, and I think it means a lot more when you're singing about something other people can relate to. That's why you don't hear Death singing about demons flying down and plucking nuns from the earth.
Mentioning how Death was different from their contemporaries with their hooks and their songwriting skills was also refreshing.
Remember the vocals. You remember the riff, but you remember the hook. There were choruses in those songs that people came back to.
By the way, Chuck misspelled skeletons here. Then we hear from Terry Butler firsthand on what happened with the bass on Leprosy.
It was my first time in the studio. It was all new to me. I basically had like an anxiety attack, panic attack in the studio. So I just asked Chuck, hey dude, to save time and money, can you do the bass?
More on the editing. Near the end, there are blackouts between stories about Chuck's cancer. It helps make the impending outcome more dramatic. Even if you knew it was coming, it's hard not to feel that.
We rehearsed quite a bit, to strengthen him up, but he would have good days and he would have bad days.
Then he went to an acupuncturist. She put one needle in the back of his neck and went like this and said, go get an MRI.
Even Jim Morse chokes up a bit.
This is my friend that's in trouble, really bad trouble, and it's getting worse. And I really would like him to know, I'm sorry.
kind of heartbreaking. With the positive points out of the way, there are also places where it fails. A lot of time is devoted to the Human era. Given the circumstances, it's easy to understand why it was a huge deal when it came out, but after a few minutes, it's like, okay, Human was groundbreaking for the time. Human is awesome. I get it.
You know, you'll have Morbid Angel, Blessed Are the Sick, and then there's Human, where it's just really kind of like different. At the time, it was different.
They also needed to interview more people. Where were Cam Lee, Andy LaRocque, Paul Masvidal, James Murphy, and Scott Burns? It's cool they got Jim Morris involved, but Scott produced 4 Death albums. That should warrant some appearance or comment. And Cam Lee? He was only mentioned once or twice in the whole movie. How do you do a movie about Death and Mantis and not have a word with him? Commentary from outsiders like the label guys, magazine editors, and a photographer were okay for a while. But it's like when Sean and Glenn Drover appeared out of nowhere to speak. I couldn't help but wonder, what do these guys have to do with Chuck or Death? Talking to Death's contemporaries in Florida like Obituary, Morbid Angel, and Nocturnus would have been more appropriate. It's no secret that Chuck wasn't a perfect person. You could say he was looking for certain directions musically, but the fact that the lineups changed every album can also be pointed to him not getting along with certain members. Everyone in this said plenty of good things about his music, but they also had a lot to say about him canceling shows, not wanting to tour, and clashing with bandmates. Why not tell a couple good stories about him as a person? Gene Hoglan said they didn't get along at the end of the Symbolic tour. Maybe he could also bring up how Chuck helped him with his back injury while recording the album? And what about his personal issues that were brought up? He didn't do the spiritual healing tour in Europe because of it. I think that warrants his mom or sister going into it a bit since it was a recurring problem.
A lot of people are fed up with the band right now. So will this band make it to Europe at last? You sure?
Then there's this amusing story right here.
We had a night off from the tour, but Benediction had a gig that night, and it was somewhere in Germany. So anyway, Benediction was like, oh, you got to come up and play a song. Chuck stayed on the bus, and we plowed through Zombie Ritual, and Paul was up there singing it, and that was that. We all thought it was harmless. Well, Chuck found out about it, and he wasn't very happy about it. I'm like, Chuck, we really didn't mean anything by it. It really wasn't that big of a deal. There was no one in the club. And he's like, you know what, man? He's like, you're conjuring a dick. I'll never forget that phrase. It echoes in my head all the time ever since then, man. You're conjuring a dick. He's like,
interesting expression. But Bobby, I think he was heading on you. You're conjuring a dick. Makes it sound like you're giving him an erection. Sounds like something you'd say to a witch. Yeah, you're conjuring a dick. Andy LaRocque is a pretty big fish being in King Diamond, so how did they get him involved with the band? We're given a little insight on the switch from Roadrunner to Nuclear Blast, but nothing about moving from Relativity to Roadrunner. It's good to hear his bandmates talk about their last memories with Chuck.
We did have this thing from Make Them Die Slowly, where one of the cannibals goes, Koangia, and the other one goes, Kwa! And so we got one of those in that last conversation. It was kind of a weak Kwa, but he still did it, I was like, all right, that's cool, man. And that was the last time we talked.
But the benefit concerts and insurance battles probably could have also been mentioned. And the ending was too quick. When it gets to the part where Chuck died, there was a whole minute left. Even the end credits are so fast you can't read it. It's as if the editor just said, fuck it, no one's gonna read that shit anyway. What about the aftermath? Maybe the epilogue can be what the other members did after Death and Control Denied disbanded. Death to All had many of the past members playing Death songs for the first time in years. Just a minute on that project would have been okay. Cannibal Corpse's documentary was 3 hours long. They were able to get just about everyone that was involved with the band, and it was packed with all kinds of information. Everything you want to know about Cannibal Corpse is there. This just isn't as comprehensive. Most unanswered questions here can be found in interviews and books, but I can't help but feel a few things could have been padded out with a longer runtime. If you're new to the band, you can get plenty out of this. For longtime fans of Chuck and Death, this is a supplement to anything you might already know. Death by Metal may not be perfect, but it's an entertaining watch with plenty of information. It's a heartfelt tribute to one of the mightiest bands of the genre, and it's great to see all of these people in one place. The metal still flows. Grind on.